Hey, Derek Poole here with Echo 5 Training, coming to you from Southwest Florida. I want to talk to you guys today about reality-based training safety. If for you, those of you that aren't aware, we just had an incident down here in Florida where a woman was shot and killed during a community outreach program. She was doing a scenario with a local police department here in Punta Gorda, Florida, which is about 10 minutes away from me. And the gun that they thought only had blanks in it actually had a live round in it, and she was shot and killed. I've been getting some questions about it down here, and instead of trying to, pick apart what went wrong, because we really don't know all the facts yet, I was thinking, what can I do as a teacher to better prepare students, potential students out there to be safe when they do go to a reality-based training class. For the last few years, I've been a part of the i.c.e. training team for the reality-based training stuff. And I decided to give Barrett Kendrick a call. He's over in Covington, Louisiana. He's one of the head guys that actually runs the reality-based training instructor development, and have a talk with him, so we can get some information out there to you guys to hopefully keep you guys safe when you go looking for a scenario-based or reality-based force-on-force type training. How you doing, Barrett?
I'm good. I appreciate you having me on. As Derek mentioned, with Barrico Training out of Covington, Louisiana, we do a lot of the end-user courses that incorporate the scenarios involving paint marking cartridges and role players. Also do a good bit on the instructor development side with our i.c.e. training program. Usually teach that a few times a year, where we're going through and teaching instructors how to responsibly run scenarios for their students, and certainly safely as well. Thank you for having me on. Sure.
The first thing I want to talk about in terms of safety is the environment, setting up the environment. Reality-based training has become really popular recently, and you see a lot of pictures and video clips and stuff on social media, and a lot of times I see these things and I'm like, wow. It doesn't really seem like they've sanitized the area. They haven't, ensured that there's nothing in the room that could be an improvised weapon. So first I wanted to talk to you about, how do we go about, making sure that the students are safe in the environment itself?
Sure. I mean, obviously we got to put, several multiple overlapping controls in place. I do like to make sure the environment is controlled in such a way that let's limit the access to it, being that we don't want people coming and going from multiple doorways or directions. Let's try to funnel everybody through one area. Let's go through. We're looking for hazards that could get people hurt during the scenario. So, maybe it could be something they trip over, hit their head on, something that could cut them brushing up against. But obviously we're also looking for things like live firearms, capable of firing live ammunition, real hammers, real machetes that may be lying around inside that environment. And then, anything that, somebody could pick up and really improvise, something obvious that they may improvise during the middle of that scenario. So kind of get all that out of the way. Let's limit the risk wherever we can.
So that after we have our area sanitized and we know that it's safe, then as we start bringing the students in and bringing them into the area, we actually do double pat downs. Two people always checking, because we all have things on us and could unintentionally bring something in to the environment that we either trained with as a defensive tool, or something that we might just improvise. So let's talk about the double pat down. Keeping the individual from bringing something in inadvertently.
Absolutely, and I'm a big fan of the double pat down. If I'm the one that's in charge of patting everybody down, the fact is that I could miss something. Maybe somebody has that 19th pocket on their lower leg that I kind of slip over. Something could be stored in there, but I like the overlapping people that are running the pat down. So it's important that before getting into that sterilized environment, that training environment, that everybody's being searched. So it's not just the students or the role players, but it's also the instructors. It's the people who are watching. It could be the media coming in. It could be camera crew and film productions. It could be the brass or the supervisors coming in to kind of watch and see what's going on. If you're going in there, it doesn't matter the reason. Everybody has to be completely sterilized of anything that they would normally carry as a defensive tool, or could get to the point that they inadvertently end up pulling out in the middle of the scenario unintentionally. It could be the knife or the pokey thingy. It could be the firearm. Sometimes people try to intentionally get things past you. A lot of people have the mindset that, if I am, I'm not going to disarm. I don't care whatever the reason. I'll always have a gun for myself for the protection of other people around. And we can't have that inside the training environment. If you look back, besides the recent event that, happened in a near area to you, there's other examples where people have died inside the training environment, and it's preventable. So let's prevent that kind of stuff. We don't need anyone in there to have any sort of live weapons on them. If it's that dangerous, and I've been to places and we've trained in places that we felt that there may be a need for a weapon on a site, well, that's where you post the armed security. That's where you put the person outside of the sterile environment, and outside of that staging area, and they can be the ones with the guns to be able to protect people. But anybody going into it, it's very important. Let's clean them out. Let's make sure that they don't have anything that could get themselves hurt or somebody else hurt. And let's again, kind of limit those risks. Let's do away with, I trust that guy, that I don't have to worry about checking him. He told me he doesn't have anything. It's very important that we're not depending on trust inside of our safety protocols.
Yep. And then on top of that, every time we run stuff, we always have a door. Somebody, if it's a door in or out, we actually post somebody there, to make sure that if somebody does go out, they catch them as they come back in to go back through that double pat down. I know we're real big on it in the stuff I've worked with you on. So let's go into the guns and the weapons themselves. You own a lot of these things. You supply them in these classes that we work in. So talk to the folks about, what should they look for if the instructor they're going to see is using the non-lethal training ammunition capable guns.
Sure. Generally speaking, we're talking about 3 different types of firearms. You have the rifles. Most of what you'll see is going to either be a bolt conversion on something like an AR-15, or the complete upper has been changed out. On the semi-automatic handguns, you could see either just a barrel swap on them, or the entire upper of the handgun gets changed over to the conversion kits. And on revolvers, there's specialized sleeves that are they come with the ammunition, and they fit down into the chambers on the cylinder to prevent the chambering of live ammunition. And that's basically the purpose of the conversion kits. Obviously, they could have designed it to where it went in your normal magazines and went in your normal duty gun or your normal everyday carry firearm, in that, making it the same exact size of something like 9mm. But they, recognized at the time that there's a pretty big risk there when people are coming in with guns capable of firing live ammunition. So the purpose of the conversion kits is that it is actually chambered in a little bit smaller than 9mm. It's about 8mm. That it won't be able to chamber and fire something like 380 or 32 or 9mm, 40, 45. So it's the conversion kits are pretty important on that. A lot of times you'll see that they'll be marked with blue on something like a slide or even a dedicated training gun. But I mentioned that there are other times that the only thing that ends up getting swapped out is just the barrel itself. So if you can't tell, if it's been converted just because of the barrel swap, generally speaking, the industry associated color to mark that has been converted would be blue. So if I have something like a Beretta 92 that I only change out the barrel in, what I'll end up doing is after I convert that, I'll wrap that grip in some blue vinyl tape so that I know that I've converted it, so that when I hand it over to the role players, they can also have faith in there that I have converted that firearm. Generally speaking, I do like to kind of cover the ammunition and the guns and the kits with the students, so that they can have trust in what we're using that day, and they can recognize the safety protocols that are being put in place. So I kind of do like to talk about that, so that they know that it's safe, that with the firearm that they're handed, that they're able to to shoot at the role players if that scenario dictates that, or that they recognize that the role players have firearms that are safe to be able to use against them. I also believe it's very important to make sure that we are limiting the people who are handling these conversions and the ammunition itself. I want to have one person that's dedicated to it, to where the role player knows that we have one individual that converted that firearm, and that one individual is going to be the one that loads the magazines and that pays attention that every round going into the magazine is the correct paint, mark, and cartridge for it, and that when it's being handed over to the role player, that they know that only one person has touched that. Same thing with the students. We've got to have one guy that is responsible for handing it out to the students or to the role players, and that's just going to help to where we don't have to, wonder, has it changed hands 5 different times? Who's touched it? Who converted it? Has it been loaded properly? We've seen, such as the case in Florida, where mistakes get made, and the more safety protocols that we can really put in place, that we can limit those risks and train in such a way that we don't have to worry about death by live ammunition inside of that training environment.
Right. Yeah. So just so everybody's clear, like our procedures, the way I've always seen you do it, and the way it's always happened when we work together is it's either you or somebody else is in charge of the guns, and when the student steps up, the gun is handed to them, put in their holster, and the scenario commences. Once the scenario ends and you call index, you or whoever's handling the firearms goes to the student, takes the gun off of them immediately. So it never even gets the opportunity of leaving basically the site of the instructors. So you really have it locked down.
Absolutely.
Cool. So the last thing I want to talk about is safety gear. You see a lot of pictures on the internet and hear stories about, pain is a great motivator. And, I believe, and I think you believe too, the scripting, having a good script elicits the response necessary. It's not the pain, but we still need to be wearing some sort of gear to protect, the person, because, what the risk should never outweigh the benefit.
Right, and if you kind of look at that, the benefit of getting trauma caused to the body is just there's not anything there. Yes, the stuff does have a pain penalty, but it's not nearly as important as the emotional component that's taking place in the scenario. I need the student so engulfed inside of that scenario that when the gun comes out, he's not worried about getting shot with a paint marking round. He's worried about getting shot because he doesn't get to go home that day, because he doesn't want to die that day, because he doesn't want to see his family killed that day. That's the important side of that, is the emotional component. But the bullets, as they're passing through the barrels on the firearms with that non-lethal training ammunition, NLTA, basically they come through, it spins out, and if it hits bare skin, it has a tendency to tear and to rip the skin on contact as that bullet is still spiraling. So because of that, I believe that it's important that everybody has full skin coverage, being gloves, long sleeves, pants. You're still going to be able to feel it, through a t-shirt, but the t-shirt itself, the long sleeve, whatever that is, you don't have to have 25 layers of clothing on, but that's going to help limit the actual damage to the skin itself. And this comes from somebody that's has learned the lessons over the years. If I took my shirt off right now, I've got several scars that are on my chest that they may be there for a long time. I know other people the same thing. They've been scarred up for years, and there's no reason to have that. So let's have full coverage on there. Let's pad up accordingly. And what I look at as mandatory equipment is going to be full coverage over the skin, full head and face protection. Just having safety glasses is not enough. They fit people differently. There's plenty of damage that can be done outside of just having the coverage over the eyes themselves. I want full throat protection as well, and groin protection. And groin, it's more emotional than anything. I've been shot in the groin. Plenty of people have been shot in the groin with the paint marking cartridges, and it's not going to be the end of the fight. But let's go ahead. Let's get those areas completely covered up as well. And I think it's also important for role players. There's no reason that they need to be getting hit over and over again, where they're taking a lot of bruising and rounds to their body the entire time. So there's plenty of ways that we can mask padding underneath the role player's clothing too.
Cool. Thanks. And those are the 3 areas that I really think are like the most important. The environment, the weapons, and the actual physical safety gear. We get that information out, for somebody watching this, they have the ability to go to a class, And if something doesn't seem right, they can ask a question. You know, well, we just walked into this room. How are we running this scenario? And then the instructor has the opportunity to say, you know, the room has been sterilized, you know, by myself and my other instructors or whatever. You know, ask the question of why am I allowed to go through this with only glasses, you know, eye protection, things like that, you know, and they have the ability to get an answer that satisfies them, or they can, you know, sit out the scenario or ultimately walk, you know. Hopefully we ended up helping somebody, you know, make a better decision.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. We both know, you know, even outside of our circles, we both know people who have been injured in such ways during scenario training that it was preventable and it wasn't necessary and there was no benefit from it. So I think that it's important, you know, as a student going in, that when they're, you know, looking at the facilitators running the scenario training, that everything should be, in regards to safety controls, should be very tightly done. I mentioned trust before. You know, trust should not be a part of safety controls, being that I don't want you to trust me, I'm not going to trust you. I want, you know, the safety protocols put in place and that they're taken seriously by everybody. A lot of times people get laxed in the afternoon. You know, we can't have that. We want it to start strong and stay strong throughout the day. If somebody leaves the training environment and when they come back in, they're going to have to be double checked again. That's important to be able to do so. So as a student walking through, you know, if they see something that, hey, you know, this kind of looks a little bit too risky, you know, ask the questions and don't be afraid to turn around and walk away if things don't change for the better.
Absolutely. So, you know, we've been talking about, you know, what for a potential student, you know, out there looking to go to a reality-based class. But if there's any instructors that end up watching this, you know, and you've been to a force-on-force class, you know, but you rightfully shouldn't feel comfortable just running off and setting up your own scenarios, you know, look up Barrett, you know, go to i.c.e training and get into one of those reality-based training instructor development classes. It's a great way to ensure that you're training people the right way and you're remaining safe, because, you know, ultimately this poor officer now has to live with the fact that, you know, somebody was killed by him and on his watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sad part is that, you know, somebody most likely handed him a firearm and said, you know, this gun's loaded with blanks, here you go. And we don't know, you know, we don't know the details. He could have been the one that loaded live rounds in it. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see how that comes out. But no, absolutely, that stuff's important. You mentioned the instructor course. You know, that course has evolved over the past few years. It's in a 3-day format now. It does a pretty good job at preparing instructors to go out and do the stuff on their own.
Yeah. Well, cool, Barrett. I want to thank you for taking the time, you know, to sit down and do this with me. Anything you want to end in closing with, or are we good?
I think we're good. I think that, you know, I mentioned that probably the strongest thing as the students need to look for is that trust factor. If people are trying to trust others in regards to this is what our safety protocol is, and you've got just, you know, students checking themselves, or, you know, students been put in a role of making sure somebody else doesn't have the weapons as a sole individual, then, you know, that's where I would start, you know, looking in a different direction. I appreciate you putting me on, and hopefully this gets out to the people that need it, bud. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, man. I'll talk to you later.